I'm very fond of the Lake Baikal. My dad grew up in Irkutsk, which is a city right next to Baikal. When I would go down to Irkutsk to visit my family, I remember once we went on this big nice boat, and the lake, I could not even believe it was a lake because it feels like you're on this ocean. When we were on the boat, I was literally looking out onto the horizon and I couldn't see the other side. Like, this is supposed to be a lake. It's huge. And the water was just so cold, but the air was so fresh. I have really fond memories of walking with my family through the train tunnels on the other side after we reached the other side and got off the boat. It's just so beautiful there. Like, it's so beautiful. So, a little bit about Baikal. It is the deepest lake in the world. It houses a large amount of unique flora and fauna that you can't find anywhere else. It's very oxygenated. UNESCO named Lake Baikal as a World Heritage Site. It actually houses 20% of the global fresh water. Lake Baikal has been through its ups and downs, and a lot of people over the years have fought to keep it preserved in the way that it is. So let's just dive right into that. So let's take us back to 1956. So this is USSR. People are just starting to learn what industrialization is. You know, nature is like their treasure. Like, it's like a treasure chest that they can go and take from. There's propaganda out there like that. Like, we looked at a few posters in my class. Yeah, so in July of 1956, the first turbines of the Irkutsk GES, which is for Gidroelektrostanция, which is like hydroelectric power station. They were just beginning to, be placed into the river Angara, which flows into Baikal, to kind of like harness the gravitational potential energy uh, of the water and turn it into electrical energy. Can you tell that I'm a physics major? Now finally the government could start to use Baikal's water. They were really looking to harness nature's powers. And it was just this really big spur of like, man wants to conquer nature and things like that. But yeah, so they put up these hydroelectric power stations all across the river. I believe there were about like 5 or 6 of them. And things were going all right, except a lot of places were getting flooded. A lot of fish were getting displaced. And this started one of the first environmental protection movements in all of the USSR. There's this really nice quote from Valentin Rasputin, which we read his Farewell to Matyora in class. And actually, Farewell to Matyora is about the displacement of the communities after the Angara was flooded with these hydroelectric power stations. Valentin Rasputin says, "How lovely the glow of Siberia's electricity must look from outer space, from which you can't see its gaping wounds." Now I want to talk about this guy named Grigorievich. He has this big plan. The Angara, it's not flowing fast enough. There are some spots where it just flows really slow, and we can really harness the energy in those spots if we put in 30,000 tons of explosives and just blow it all up. But the thing is that the section that he wanted to blow up where the river was slow was the breeding grounds for a certain type of fish. Alright, so in 1958 they had this conference and there were 2,000 scientists there. This guy named Kozhov, he stood up and publicly denounced Grigorievich's idea and was saying like how awful this is. And there are accounts saying that in that room there were people, with gray hair, and there were people that were really young, and they were all like applauding about how the Baikal needs to be saved. And then in 1958 there was also a proposal to build a paper and pulp plant in Baikalsk, which was a town next to Baikal. But what the people didn't know was that there was more than one reason to construct this plan. Not only did they want to make paper and pulp, it was also a secret operation to make certain military cords that are made out of cellulose. I'm told that they're for tires. It's like this really valuable asset that you can only make with cellulose, and to make cellulose you need a lot of fresh water. So they said, oh well, let's just put it in Baikal. Cellulose plants, they generate a lot of byproducts and waste, which there's nowhere to put it. It would just go straight into Baikal. So of course, the scientific community is outraged by this. They write an article called In Defense of Baikal. They collect a bunch of signatures, which is sent to Literaturная газета, which is like a name of a newspaper, on October 21st of 1958. There's actually another really big environmental issue as well, the logging that was taking place on the Baikal watershed. So the dirt there is very shallow, it's on top of a bunch of granite, and there are a bunch of trees, right? These logging people, they come in and they just cut all the trees down. The soil there is so shallow that the trees can't, regenerate themselves. They would build these rafts to transport logs across Baikal, but the thing is that the rafts were created very poorly, and as the rafts were swimming across Baikal, some logs would be detached and they would sink, and then these logs would decompose on the bottom of Baikal, eating up all of that, oxygen in the water, which, as I was saying earlier, is so necessary for all those forms of life. And this was being done to such a large degree that conditions in Baikal really started to deteriorate. So ecologists and scientists brought this to the attention of the government once again. There was a law passed saying that, okay, look, the pulp plant won't be opened until we're sure that they can fully get rid of all of their waste, or at least get rid of their waste to some extent, and that logging is kind of prohibited. But the thing is, 5 years later, no one's really following that because it's not being enforced. From 1966 to 1970, Stalin was passing his 5-year plans, which demanded an increase in production in cellulose and an increase in production of logs. To meet these goals, people were not following the laws and destroying all of Baikal so that they can meet these economic goals and get these profits. And then in 1969, there finally was a very strict law passed saying, no more, we can't do this, but studies still show that the level of pollution in the water was still increasing. So this was kind of, an environmental revolution, because nothing like this has happened with all these scientists getting together to protect the environment like this. So for 40-50 years, the cellulose factory was working, it was going, it was doing its own thing, the laws were in place, and they were better than before, so I guess there was some sort of acceptance around that. So now we're in the early 2000s, Putin has come to power, the USSR has crumbled down. So in November of 2008, Putin starts to say Baikal is so important, we need to preserve it. And eventually, in February of 2009, the Baikal pulp plant did close. But this was really short-lived. Putin went into a submarine and went onto the very bottom of Baikal. It was kind of in this big publicity event saying our president, he's doing such brave things, and going to get to know the nature very personally. And so when Putin gets out of the boat, he's being interviewed, and I actually have a video. Let's watch it.
Что же касается Байкала, то и я своими глазами видел, и вот ученые нашей Академии наук это могут подтвердить, Байкал в хорошем состоянии находится, и никакого загрязнения там практически нет.
So he says, I saw it with my own eyes, and there's no pollution. I see practically no pollution on the ocean floor. I don't know what these scientists are talking about. Over the next few months, he started to relax the laws that were banning industry around Lake Baikal. Prime Minister Vladimir Putin even allowed the cellulose plant to reopen in 2010. This was a huge shock for everyone because scientists everywhere were begging to get this plant shut down for so many years, and then it got shut down, and that was huge for them, and then it just gets reopened just like that again. After a very short run, the plant did end up permanently closing, I believe in 2013, but this was not due to more protests about the plant. In fact, it was due to just economically it just wasn't working. They also say, the water is self-cleaning, the environment can take care of itself. But the thing is, that's not true. Maybe it may look like that because, it is true that there are these crustaceans called Epischura, which, take all of those pollutants and keep it inside of them. But the thing is that Epischura are predated by larger animals and larger animals than that, and eventually these pollutants work up all the way to the top of the food chain to where you find a NERPA and inside of them are these toxins, which you say like it's self-cleaning, but no, it's really infecting. It infects everything. And this was an idea really famously explored in Rachel Carson's 1962 book Silent Spring, which was a huge explosion, you know, all over the West and all over Europe when people started to realize that these kinds of things really do happen. We're here like 50, 60 years later, and these fundamental things about biology are still just being misunderstood and entirely disregarded. It absolutely blows my mind how the government just refuses to acknowledge any of the science, even when it's, you know, pushed straight into their faces. It makes decisions, you know, purely based off of economic gain. But yeah, I want to talk about how all of this is coming to fruition in the present day. So right now, every year there are about 1 million tourists at Baikal. You know, it's a very nice place, it's very beautiful. The influx of tourists had to be accommodated by, you know, building a bunch of hotels. And they build the hotels like really cheaply and like really awfully. And it's actually estimated that around 90% of all of these tourist hotels are built like not following the proper sanitation and environmental protection laws. There's almost no sewage system. There's no trash pickup system either. So these tourists are coming, you know, they are leaving all of their trash, and eventually all of this ends up going into Lake Baikal. In the really large tourist populated places, like in Malaya More, the water there, which was drinkable 15 years ago, now authorities warn against swimming in it because of the pollutants in that water. The reality of the situation is that Lake Baikal is being threatened by the tourism and by this corruption. These, you know, companies are just allowing all of this to happen just for the sake of making a quick profit off of these tourists that come to Baikal every year. Now, I don't want you to think that everything is hopeless. Of course, there is a solution to this, but it's going to take a lot of organization. I see this Baikal story as proof Russia is still obsessed with this man-conquering nature dynamic even after the USSR has fallen. The political system does not care about science, only about the economic gain of these ventures. They do not care that the environment is being destroyed, and all of the scientists and people who are saying like, no, Baikal is Russia's national treasure, they are just being tossed to the side at this point because they just have no say. You know, the government wants what the government wants, and at the end of the day, that's just a spike in economy. They just want more money. And it's just quite sad. But the truth of the matter is that it is, you know, these scientists that are standing up for this that are really going to end up making the difference. Protests do work. In fact, I want to invite my grandfather to join me. He participated in a protest on the 22nd of November in 1987, which was one of the first large-scale environmental protests in all of the USSR. But I'll allow him to tell the story. Here's my grandfather, Igor Madyarov.
Я был взрослый человек, работал программистом в Академии наук, в Сибирском энергетическом институте. Вокруг Байкала всегда было очень много проблем. В свое время был построен этот самый БЦБК, Байкальский целлюлозо-бумажный комбинат, против которого тоже протестовали, но не так бурно. Очень ядовитые отходы, связанные с производством высококачественной целлюлозы, из которой делают отбеленную бумагу, корд. Вот эти отходы, их девать-то некуда. Сбрасывать в Байкал или в реки нельзя, они отравят все. Но он находится в чаше гор. Куда девать отходы? Все, что ты куда-то выплеснешь, это с этих гор водой смоет опять в Байкал. Было устроено несколько, больше десятка, около 16, что ли, бассейнов, которые наполняли этими отходами. За много лет эти озера наполнились доверху. Начались экологические катастрофы. Во время весенних паводков, когда снег тает в горах, и реки переполняются, они идут вниз в Байкал, они доходят до территории этих озер, наполняют эти озера. И вот, когда они попадают в эти озера, конечно, они сносят там вот эти все отходы с этими водами, все равно попадают в Байкал. И эти катастрофические явления продолжались регулярно, ежегодно. Тогда решили, что надо построить трубу, которая бы откачивала эти отходы и по трубе сбрасывала их куда подальше, через горы в реку Иркут. И вдоль реки стоят деревни, где люди берут питьевую воду из этого Иркута. И вот этот проект утвердили министры, правительство, Академия наук, эксперты все. Это был кошмар. Вот против этой трубы и выступила общественность, жители Иркутска и других городов. Началось все в июне, июль, август. Все лето собирали подписи против этого ужасного проекта. Подготовка была уже полгода шло к этому. Собирали подписи против. Я, конечно, был в курсе. Я тоже поставил свою подпись. Эти работы уже начались. Трубы были привезены и складированы возле БЦБК. И началась вырубка леса. Это реально реликтовые, очень ценные и редкие тополя в 3-4 обхвата. Стволы имеют огромные когтелевашни. Они очень высокие. И, конечно, этим тополям очень много лет, больше 100. И эти тополя стали резать для того, чтобы прорубить примерно 80 километров просеки по тайге. Не все было гладко, и, конечно, была некоторая опасность. Была первая в истории длительной такое свободное выступление граждан. Никто не знал, чем это может закончиться. На улицу в мороз вышло примерно 5000 человек. Это очень большая была, такого не бывало никогда. Сохраним Байкал, нет трубе. Это прям на фоне вот этих труб складированных. Вот эта трубе труба был такой, был такой слоган. Вот фотографию, где по главной улице Иркутска, по Карла Маркса идет демонстрация. Там на переднем плане идет человек в такой шапке зимней с каким-то пакетиком в руках. Вот это я. Ну, мне так кажется, что это я, потому что я помню этот момент, когда фотографировали, и пальто, вот это осеннее, у меня не было зимнего пальто. Я ходил в осеннем. И вот мы прошли, и я в этой колонне был. Мы прошли по всему городу и дошли до Ангары, до набережной. На этой площади, на набережной, состоялся митинг, и руководил всем этим шествием и митингом такой Анатолий Сосунов, такой очень активный человек, биолог. Он сказал тогда важные слова. Он сказал, что мы как бы БЦБК не победили еще, то есть он еще работал, его не закрыли, его закрыли гораздо позднее. Но мы уже победили в себе рабов. Наша победа заключается в том, что мы победили в себе холопское сознание. Люди выступили против решений правительства. Это был душевный такой подъем. Конечно, мы были все возмущены, не только я был возмущен. Все, кто обсуждали это, мои друзья, которые тоже все работали вот в академических институтах, они совершенно разных профессий. Физики, математики, биологи, программисты, кого там только не было. И никто не понимал смысла этого проекта. Все понимали его исключительную вредность. Чувствовали себя свободными людьми, которые могут выразить свой протест. Вот это было редкое такое состояние, потому что раньше жизнь в стране была такой глухой, безнадежной абсолютно. После нашего выступления, вот этого, после этой демонстрации, правительство страны еще раз рассмотрело этот проект и его запретило. Закрыли проект, самое главное. Вот это была главная победа.
It's just really disappointing that industrialization is still happening around Baikal. For example, a lot of Chinese businessmen have been looking around the area. They built a water bottling plant in the Kultuk village. This plant is threatening a unique area, just like Baikal, the Dalovska wetland. There have already been protests and there is a petition signed by PhD scientists, but the plant is still standing, and this has been going on since 2019. This situation is not over yet. There are still so many things that can be done better. For the tourism, the government could either give money so that can be handled properly, or, there could be more emphasis on tourists going and actually enjoying the nature rather than building resorts. And then in addition to that, to minimize the environmental damage by all of the waste, to just develop some sort of waste management systems that are going to pick up that tourist waste and take it somewhere far away from Lake Baikal. It's just so heartbreaking because eventually all of these things are going to add up, and the dead zone that is already in Lake Baikal is going to continue spreading unless some action is taken, and it just seems like nothing is being done to preserve this beautiful lake with so many diverse species that are found nowhere else in the world. But what's more important is to know about things like this so that we as people together can take action. All in all, it seems as though Russia is just repeating the same mistakes of the USSR, and that things are just not changing. And that can be really hard to hear. It's not over. I want to give a huge thank you to my grandfather for agreeing to participate. Stay safe out there, everyone, and thank you for watching.